Why do you think Cheney wanted to go into Iraq? And do you think that he considers it a success today?
This is a bit of a puzzle. In some ways, Cheney has been absolutely open and on the table about his views on Iraq. He really does believe that there's a huge risk of what he calls a nexus between terrorists, weapons of mass destruction, and a hostile state that might pass those weapons along. He did not believe that Iraq was the gravest risk of that, and that's the impression he gave. He was more worried about North Korea and about Iran, and even to some extent about Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, in terms of a nexus between state and terror threat. And the problem was there were no really good military options there. So what do you do if you move into a bad neighborhood or find yourself in a bad neighborhood and there's a lot of scary guys out there? His view is you give a good beating to one of them as a lesson. So
the Fonzie theory, sort of, right?
The Fonzie theory. I wish I'd talked to you before I wrote the chapter.
You hit one guy and then you never have to hit anybody else.
Yeah, and so his aides, I mean, the more formal theoretical way, his aides told me on the record that he considered this to be sort of a demonstration effect. And so he thought he was serving American security. And the other thing that's sort of out of sync with his public comments is that he actually had some real doubts about the war. He thought it was a fairly close call whether this is the best strategy for dealing with the threat. In the end, he thought it was. But sort of in private, from time to time, he would talk about, there really are no good options here. And he knew very well that the war was not going well. And he considers it essential to keep public opinion, and so he wouldn't say that out loud.
I mean, do you really think that it's all exclusively about that nexus, that oil plays no part? Because I think to a certain extent, if you look in the Project for New American Century writings, the idea of Iraq as a strategic, a geopolitical beachhead, or a way of basically controlling the spigot, you could sort of interchange that notion of you want to be in that bad neighborhood because you want to be able to influence those players, but you're also in a neighborhood where you can also influence how much oil they send to the Far East.
There's offense and defense in that theory. And you have to be clear, Cheney has associated with neocons and even employed some of them, but he is not himself a neocon because he doesn't fundamentally, well, for one thing, he wasn't a liberal Jew when he grew up.
Right.
But for another, he is not a big believer in spreading democracy at the point of a sword. In fact, he's quite a big skeptic of that. So he and Bush came to the Iraq War for very different reasons. The oil thing, the defensive aspect is, if you're worried about Iraq as a potential threat, then the more Saddam Hussein controls oil resources and builds up his military strength, the more threat he is to Saudi Arabia, the more he can exert sort of indirect control over American supplies. And so a vital economic resource for the United States and its allies is under threat. Mirror image of that is, if you have a friendly state in Iraq or even a degree of American control, then you can control that spigot, as you said. And I don't doubt that that played some role in his thinking. After September 11th, it was very much a secondary factor.
So it was a twofer.
Yeah, maybe a threefer, but as Paul Wolfowitz said, and Wolfowitz is a neocon, and he is just about the only person senior in the first Bush administration who wanted to go to Baghdad. Wolfowitz said there were a lot of reasons for the war, and we just sold the one that we could all agree on. Yeah.
Well, the book is Angler, the Cheney Vice Presidency by Barton Gellman, who was kind enough to sit down with me and talk. It's a great book and great for Christmas. A great way to celebrate the end of the Bush presidency to find out what really went on. I appreciate you coming in, Bart.
Thank you very much.